And we're delighted this evening to have Hannah and Bob with us. At each of the talks, I've introduced the speakers as my friends, my old friends. Well, I've got a new friend now, Bob. We've had a meal together, so we're friends. So I'm delighted to have them. They're here representing really our Rocha. Rocha, as most of you will know, is a charity and organisation, a Christian organisation which is involved in conservation, outreach and Christian missionary work as well. And it's an amazing range of things they're involved in. And some of you will be familiar with our Rocha through Eco Church. I believe, was it founded, Eco Church was founded by a Rocha? Yes. And Bob and Hannah are marine scientists. Hannah I've known as a member of Christians in Science in Plymouth, and we're going to be informed, and I'm sure entertained as well, by some wonderful work that Rocha are doing. And the title of the talk is Studying, Conserving and Restoring Marine Habitats. So over to you, Bob and Hannah.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you so much everyone for coming, and Mike for inviting us. It's a privilege to be able to stand here and tell you all a little bit about Rocha and the work that's going on. A little bit more about me, just as a way of introduction. From the age of about 2.5, I had the privilege of growing up in Cornwall. So after about 30 years of living in Cornwall, calling this county home, perhaps I'm now officially Cornish, but I'll leave that to those actually Cornish in the audience. But I am privileged to have grown up in a Christian family, and part of that has included encouraging my ability to be curious, both in asking questions about our faith, but also about why species are where they are, and also can we help them if they're not okay. So growing up, we used to head out to rock pools, and with our in-house marine biologist, Digby was our first springer. And we'd spend lots of hours rock pooling and doing lots of other different adventures as well, gaining lots of different memories of awe and wonder of God's creation. And in the Psalms, David really described this really well, and this is from the Message version. I look up at your macro skies, dark and enormous, your handmade sky jewelry, moon and stars mounted in their settings. Then I look at my micro self and wonder, why do you bother with us? Why take a second look our way? So as we begin this talk this evening, I wanted to throw a question out to you all. When was the last time you experienced that awe and wonder that David describes? Perhaps share with your neighbour. If anyone would like to share any, please feel free. And I look forward to sharing my story a bit later.
I must be about 6, I think. My first conscious experience, my parents were missionaries in Uganda, and I remember being on a hill overlooking Lake Victoria, with pine trees, and there was I think it was an aeroplane chugging across the sky, but there was something about it that just went, and I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to say to my parents or whatever. It was my first conscious experience of God, I suppose.
Cool, thank you. Hand over to you. Just experiencing some technical.
Well, thank you for allowing me to come and be a part of this tonight. Thank you, Mike, for inviting, and appreciate all of you coming on as well. You can tell but my accent is not Cornish, so it's from Devon, some across the I know you're living in Devon. No, so my name is Bob Sluka, and I'm a marine biologist, marine conservationist working with Rocha. And right now I'm based in Florida, and but I work with the Rocha International team and also lived in Oxfordshire for 11 years. And so It was an opportunity. I was here, and so just extended a few days to be able to come and be with you also, and with Hannah. So I'm very pleased to be here. Rocha has been explained as a conservation charity, and just briefly to say something about the 5 kind of values and core beliefs or things that bind us together. You know, we are Christian, so we'll talk some tonight. We're trying to integrate the science and faith. So we believe that we as Christians can also work in the sciences, can be involved in conservation, and that those two things naturally go together. But our conservation work starts and flows out of a biblical response to God's love for His creation. We are involved in conservation, and so that's about trying to understand, protect, restore those things which have gone wrong with our world, and particularly focused on biodiversity conservation. So biodiversity means all the abundance of life that is out there, including from genetic differences to different kinds of species to different kinds of habitats. So we do a lot of place-based conservation, so we try to be located in a particular habitat or location. We're going to give you a number of case studies tonight from some of those places where we've tried to really understand and be motivated by our Christian faith to conserve species and habitats. We strongly believe in community, and so we do the work in community with local people who are there, and often with international groups that come along. We strongly believe that everyone has something to add to this. So cross-cultural even means amongst us. There would be differences culturally. And you, like we saw, I almost felt like we could just keep sharing our stories and call it a night, because we can learn from each other. You don't have to be an expert. And so we draw from each other's strengths and the diversity. And we're very much committed to cooperating. So while we are a faith-based organization, we're not faith-biased. And so we try to work with whoever wants to come and be a part of it. And we believe this is something that can really be uniting us with each other. So that's just a little bit about us. Maybe that's new, or maybe you're just wondering why I repeated something you already knew. But I want to take you tonight to a number of different locations where what we want to try to do is understand what it looks like to care for and protect a particular place, how to use science, how to use faith to do that. So the first place I want to take you to is Kenya. And when you think of Kenya, you probably are thinking of lions or cheetah. But my view of Kenya is this. This is in Watamu on the coast, and rated one of the best beaches in all of Africa. And Rocha has the good fortune of having a research center located right on the shores of this beach. Very little was known about this area. So one of the uses of science that we were involved in, and Hannah herself was one of the students who came down and did some of the original research, is trying to understand exactly what lives in this place. Because if you don't know your place, if you don't know what's there, you don't know the species, you can't do a very good job at all of protecting them. So we did a biodiversity inventory, it's called. So over a number of years and a number of students, it was hard work. We had to go out snorkeling and walking along this beautiful beach and trying to identify all the different animals and plants. And one of the things that we realized is that there was a species there that was very rare. In fact, it is considered by the groups that decide these things critically endangered, which means it's very close to being extinct. It's one of the closest categories to that. So there are very few of these individuals left in the world. And so this is called a guitar fish. So if you imagine a shark They squash its head to look like a stingray. It's kind of that, or you can imagine a stingray that you sort of mold its back end into a shark. So it is related to sharks and rays. And so one of the things that's interesting about this species is that it is also caught in the local fishery. So especially now we're hearing a lot about the COP and climate change, and that's hugely important. But for a lot of species like this, it's actually fishing pressure and being caught, and too many being caught, that are actually the cause of them nearly going extinct. So fisheries as an issue in the ocean is really, really important. And these kinds of animals, they might live to 20, 30, 40 years old. They might not stop reproducing until they're even 6, 8, 10 years old, and then they might just produce 1 or 2 kind of babies every year, if that. So those kinds of characteristics mean it's very easy to overfish them. So one of the things that we were trying to do is help the local population to understand the conservation value of this species, and then to, you know, if they catch one in their net, throw it back. And that's something that is very difficult to try to get people to do. We also are involved in something called a marine protected area, or a short MPA. And this is a graph. There won't be a lot of graphs tonight. But what this shows, there's a marine park called the Exuma Cays Land and Sea Park. And so inside of this marine park, this bar indicates that there's a lot of fish. Outside, north and south of the park, there's not as many. So what you find, and not surprisingly, if you develop these kinds of parks in the ocean that actually can protect animals from overfishing, what we see in Genesis, this idea of the sea flourishing, the abundance, the diversity that's described, these animals can come back. So if we can protect this guitarfish inside of this marine park, the way God designed the world is that these kind of animals can flourish. And part of that is related to biology. This is a 40 centimeter fish, 50 and 60. And what you can see is if when you double the size of a fish, you don't double the reproduction. It might be 200 times as many eggs. So this fish is only 20 centimeters bigger than the other one, but it produces 3 million eggs versus 350,000 eggs. So it's really important to protect large animals inside of these parks. And so what happens is the animals get big, they produce lots of eggs. The eggs float in the water and they go out and they repopulate other areas. So this is a way that marine protected areas are a kind of form of conservation that in our area in Kenya we're supporting. We're concerned, the Bible and God is concerned with those fishermen who are trying to rely on that. Food security is a real issue for these fishermen. And so you see guys like this, when you're going out, they're trying to just bring home their daily fish instead of their daily bread. And the area that we work in is particularly a Muslim area. And this is sort of me some years ago, but my daughter and I got a chance to go into one of the local Muslim schools and talk very openly about how the scriptures actually support and can promote caring for God's world. So that joint religious affiliation actually allowed us to have a conversation that included the science and faith. One of the other projects that we are working on in Kenya, I'm going to let our Kenyan colleagues actually explain it to you. And so this is a woman, this is, believe it or not, Queen Elizabeth, and this is Michelle Beanstra, and Michelle is going to ask Queen a few questions. She's working with these fishermen, and I think you'll find it's very interesting to hear her perspective on this.
Hi, my name is Michelle Feenstra. I am here with Rocha, Kenya for the next 6 months working on a marine microplastic project. Today I am with my colleague Queen.
My name is Queen Elizabeth and I'm working with Rocha, Kenya as an environmental education officer. I create awareness on sharks, rays and guitarfish belonging to the Elasmo Branch group.
Would you mind telling us a little more about your work here with Rocha?
I started visiting local fishermen and school wildlife club members from January to date, and I've reached around 250 fishermen and reached 274 students from 8 schools. That is, those are schools around the Watamu Marine Park. And for the fishermen, I visited 9 groups, and I'm glad and happy to have been accepted so well by the local fishermen. Yeah.
What is your focus when discussing the Elasmo Branch species with the local fishermen and communities?
Yeah, my main emphasis is that Elasmo Branch are the top predators in the ocean and have been threatened so much in our Watamu Marine National Park due to illegal fishing, poaching and habitat loss. So explaining to them about the importance, them being the symbol of a healthy ocean. Then once we remove all the sharks or rays and guitarfish in the ocean, that means we're going to have a healthy Watamu Marine National Park. Yeah.
How have the fishermen and school children and communities been when receiving this information? Is it something they're aware of, or is it new to learn?
First, it was new to learn, like they thought of whale being the top predators, but then when I introduced to them about sharks and whale feeding on shrimps and the small fish, they were like, oh, okay, they didn't know about it. And so far, teaching songs to the kids and emphasizing on the concept of a healthy Watamu Marine Park, and we having the reserve, most of them going from the Watamu Marine Park to the reserve to lay eggs and breed. Then you find that they accept it so well, and I hope for transformation because I really like talking about it.
Yes, that's amazing.
Yeah.
What has been your most favorite part working in this role?
I can say it's more of advocacy and hoping to transform. So once we have the follow-ups and most visits to the fishermen, I find it to be there is a good relationship, and they have a platform of being able to talk about, to present their views and suggestions too. So I find it very interesting, and the concept that we always come together and discuss these issues and they participate so well, it's so pleasing. To add on that, I also involve the concept on we coming with an aim of encouraging each other to protect God's creation, that is the ocean. So getting to involve Muslims or finding Muslims in these groups is so motivating, and finding them participating so well and coming together, we have a common goal in protection of the ocean. Yeah.
The conversations around creation care with the Muslim fishermen, are those ones that they understand, or is it a new concept to them?
I can say it's a new concept because most of the participants or members are mostly thinking that environment is more of scientific, and yeah, but now that we're coming in and relating both God's creation and quoting some Bible verses in it and combining both, it's a new concept, yes, but they're receiving it so well, and I'm happy about it and motivated.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
As a woman of God, personally, how has this experience been for you?
It has been so well. I find myself working in Rocha, Kenya as a blessing and a calling, and my passion keeps on increasing every day. I say any platform that I get to talk about it, I will always talk about it. And what makes me move forward is I'm having a hope that there will be transformation. So God's hope and my passion increasing keeps me going.
That's amazing. Thank
Yeah.
you for taking the time today to discuss what you do and your passion.
Thank you so much, and thank you for bringing me here to talk about it. Thank you.
I want to move on to a new location. With guitarfish, with the other species, from Genesis 1, we know that God called it good, and and he loves it, and therefore its value to us doesn't matter for whether we protect it or not. But some creatures, it's just very easy to love. And so the area I want to take you to is Florida. And this is sort of my, not back garden, so to speak, but very close to where I live. And it's a beautiful area. Sometimes you have to watch out. There are lots of alligators that are friendly, but the creature I'm talking about is the manatee. And lots of people love to come to our area to try to see manatees, and it's hard not to love these guys. One time we were out in a spring, and so there's some areas that the manatees like to go into, and it's this crystal clear water, and there's these guards, so to speak, on kayaks, kind of making sure no one's harassing the manatees. But if the manatees come up to you, there's nothing you can do. So one time we were in this river, and my wife was trying to respect the distance to the manatee, but this manatee just wanted to come up and hug her. And so she would come, this manatee came up to my wife, and again, she's trying to back up, but this manatee just came and literally put its arms around her. She kind of felt its mouth snuffling kind of all over her. And, it was just such an amazing experience. So and sometimes, it's easy to really say, yeah, we should care about the manatees. And one of the things that's going on right now in Florida that's very difficult is actually a lot of manatees are dying. And so this is an aerial view of what's called the Indian River Lagoon. It's a big estuary and one of the most biodiverse estuaries. So there's thousands of species. The manatee is just one of them. So there's a lot of reasons to care for this place. But if we think just about the manatee right now, what happens is that it's a very shallow lagoon, and on shore, as you probably know, like here, building houses, and also there's agriculture, and so when it rains, the runoff, the nutrients, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, goes into this environment and forms these algae blooms. And this has happened so consistently. Here's development. This was an advertisement for selling more houses closer to the shore. All this development, when it rains, all those nutrients just go into the lagoon. And so what's happened is that the algae blooms have gone on for so long that most of the seagrass is dying in this estuary, and that's been the food for the manatee. So often, with manatees in particular, it's often touted as a big success story. Scientists tried to figure out in the past why there were fewer manatees, and the reason was because of boats. There was boat collisions, and so they actually put some restrictions on boats, and we saw the manatee numbers going up. In fact, they're being considered taken off the endangered species list in America because the conservation has been successful. But this new threat of this algae blooms, so back here, and the seagrass dive is something that's really just been happening this past year. So it's something we're trying to understand, that really the way we've been living has been hurting this lagoon to such extent that it's causing these massive changes. So we know that we're commanded to care for God's world. And so what I like about some of the work with Rocha is that the science is really helping us to love God and love our neighbor, in this case, our animal neighbor, the manatee. And so what are the options? How can Rocha help? There's a lot of other organizations in this area, universities and zoos who are doing projects. So our value of cooperation that I mentioned before, in Florida, rather than starting our own projects, we're trying to get the church and also young scientists who want to be trained involved in trying to restore this lagoon so that it can thrive. So actually, this is actually Michelle, who was in the video. She came, and what she's making is a bag full of oyster shells. So the local restaurants, they actually have to get the oysters from far away. You can't have any more of the oyster fishery in the lagoon because of all the problems and overfishing in the past. So restaurants give this local zoo, our county zoo, all of these shells, and then volunteers like Michelle and myself and others go and make bags of these oysters and then lay them. As you can see this dark area here, this is basically forming a new oyster reef. And so live oysters are put inside of these bags alongside with the shells as a substrate. And this will eventually turn into something that has a lot of diversity. So in this photo here, our team, and actually this is a volunteer from the UK on the left, we went and we sampled some of these oyster bags and looked at the biodiversity that was developing in the live oysters. So what will happen, Lord willing, over time is that we can use, the science told us there was something wrong with how we were treating God's lagoon. It's His. It's also, this lagoon is important not only for manatees, but for many people, for recreation, for jobs. Just people move to this area because of that. So it's also loving our human neighbor. And so using the science of restoration, which is trying to bring things back to what they were at some point in the past, we're able to make these types of oyster reefs. And Lord willing, as these grow and they thrive, the oysters will filter the water. We do need to continue. We're trying to work with churches and individuals to do things like not water their lawn or fertilize their lawn. But Lord willing, this will result in a lagoon that again glorifies God and praises Him in the way that it was meant to be. So again, I think it's a real good example of science helping us to love God and love our neighbor. Lastly, I want to turn to a project that we've done in a number of places, but I was just last week in Portugal and focusing on plastic pollution. And I know I don't have to go into the problems. Everyone's been overwhelmed probably with information on why plastic is bad, so I'll skip that. But what we've done is we've tried to develop resources so that churches, that individuals can actually develop a science and theology-based project on plastic pollution. We've done this in a number of places. So we have a microplastics and plastics toolbox that's freely available online. So this is my daughter on the left and a Dutch master's student, just from last week. This photo is in Portugal. This is where Rocha started, in this right in this area. And Tom here is studying how plastic is coming down the rivers. My daughter's kind of helping out and doing some microplastics sort of research. So what we're trying to understand is the source of these plastics. So in this case, in Portugal, we used science to try to monitor or basically keep track of what plastics are there and when are they there and where are they. And what we found was that 90% of the microplastics on these beaches were little styrofoam balls. And we found that the closer you got to these harbors, the more abundant the styrofoam was. So our next part of this that we're trying to do then is say, well, okay, well, what is actually the source of the styrofoam? We did some preliminary searching. Some of the fishermen used little styrofoam boxes for their bait. So can we then provide a conservation solution? Is there a way to provide something different for the fishermen to use that isn't going to break down so easily like these styrofoam boxes do? So it's again the science pointing us to a potential solution that will help sort some of this plastic problem. Another thing that we've been working on is, you may have heard of nurdles. These are these small plastic pellets. So this is on our beach in Florida here. We've got students looking out for nurdles. This is the pre-production plastic pellets, that everything that's plastic like this started out as, and they get out into the open and wash up on beaches. They can transport viruses, and also they give off toxins. So again, this is something that science has shown us. We didn't create plastic with the idea of hurting ourselves, But actually what the science is showing us again is that something we intended for good is actually causing us to not love God in the way we should, and for His creation to not glorify God in the way we should. And in fact, actually, we're exporting it to other people, so we're not loving our neighbor. If your plastic goes out in the ocean, it's going to go along and impact someone else, and that's really unloving. So then we try to use these scientific techniques to try to understand where and when these nurdles are showing up on beaches, and then work with industry and government to try to regulate these type of things. So this is my daughter. It's a family affair. Often they get forced into doing these things, but this is from Cornwall. So this is on a beach. Do you recognize the beach? Blurry in the back. But these are nurdles from the south coast of Cornwall that we collected, you know, in 20 minutes on the beach there. So it's a problem here. And so if one of the best ways that you can be involved in, I'm sure you know this, and probably all of you, how many people have been involved in a beach cleanup in the last 10 years or so? Yeah, most people. Right, so we know this is actually a very effective way to remove plastic from the ocean. And so if you, your church, or anyone are interested, there's a Bible study at this, actually it should be just plastics toolbox. So get rid of the micro there, just plastics toolbox. That's my mistake. And so we have Bible studies there. We have scientific resources, there's videos, there's talks by our theology director on, you know, what does the Bible say about plastic, and so forth. And also, shameless promotion here, I have one of these Grove booklets that just came out recently. We'll have them here for, they're on £4 each, that kind of look at a theology of plastic and really how we can use plastic to help heal our world rather than hurt it. So the goal, again, of this project is we've understood there's a problem. We're not loving God and loving our neighbor like we should through the way we use plastic. And so can we then, as an organization in these places, figure out a way to help God's creation heal and glorify Him as they're meant to be. I'll turn it over to Hannah.
Thanks, Bob. So Bob's been giving maybe some of the more negative impacts that the humans have on the ocean. And I get to have the privilege of talking about the biodiversity, so maybe some of the more positive impacts. And John Spicer gave a talk a couple of weeks ago, which I'd highly recommend giving a watch if you haven't already heard it, looking at biodiversity, why should we care? But today I'd like to suggest there's two avenues for biodiversity and how humans and the oceans are inextricably linked. And this, firstly, childlike wonder of God's creation, and then secondly, finding the hidden things of God in the ocean. So, as I started this talk with this section of the Psalm 8, and childlike wonder of God's creation, before you even begin studying or researching a species, a habitat, a place, there is this awe and wonder moment where you stop and look. And for me, as I said, I would share what one of mine is. This is back when I was interning at Rocha, Kenya, and we would go out to this particular creek at night. In my opinion, the only reason to pull an all-nighter at university is to go catch birds at night. So we put up these nets on the creek, and you'd have to remember where the nets were because it was dark by the time you were going back to check the nets, and we checked them about every half an hour to carefully take out the birds, and then we'd measure the birds, put a ring on, so that if we ever caught the bird again, we'd know that is that particular bird and where it's been, where it's come from. So we'd set up these nets on this particular night, and as you can see already, there's this lovely reflection in the creek bed of the sky. And as the night drew on, it was cloudless, the stars were out, and they had this beautiful reflection as the tide was rising. So you'd be walking through ankle-deep water. And at the time there was bioluminescence in the water as well, so Bob can tell you more about bioluminescence if you're interested. There's some in Florida as well, and in fact around the Cornwall coastline too. But this bioluminescence, when you walk through it, it creates this light. And so as I was walking through, the stars reflected in the ocean, in the creek, and the bioluminescence flitting about as you walked. But the impact for me was one of the other birdringers turned to me and said, "Isn't God's creation awesome?" And it's that level of being able to be immersed in that awe and wonder, but also to be able to share it with others. So that's one of my awe and wonder stories. But that's a big moment, something that is quite hard to miss. What about some of the smaller moments? So Mike's not allowed to answer, but does anyone know what this is? It's a very small, 2 centimetre max maybe, creature. It's the palm of my hand that it's sitting on. Anyone? Go on, Mike, go on.
No.
That might well be an Onkydella celtica.
There aren't many people who know the scientific name, the Celtic sea slug. So Mike has studied these. I'm sure he'll answer questions after if you're interested, looking at the habitat preference and like a movement of these slugs, sea slugs. But they're only found in a few beaches in Cornwall and Devon. And you have to actually look really hard at the rocks to actually be able to find them. But bringing back to an Rocha project, during my Masters I interned with Rocha UK and Rocha International, as well as doing my Masters at Plymouth. And so I had the privilege of studying these little guys, the blue-rayed limpet. And they range from a few millimetres to a couple centimetres in size. And these aren't your average limpets, the white dots that you'd see on the rocks on the beaches. These guys predominantly live on seaweed and eat the seaweed and live there. And so over the course of the year, I got to watch them as they grew, as the population increased and decreased, and seeing what different interactions there were and what impacts they had on the kelp. But you only find these if you happen to be on a beach at spring low tide, and you look through many kelps before you actually find them. So these awe and wonder moments where you actually have to stop and look and revel. It kind of defines all the different projects that I've done in the last 10 years and before, is that I often end up researching the species that are often overlooked or not even noticed. And it's an absolute privilege to be able to study them. So, firstly, you have this awe and wonder moment, and then secondly, you then come on to this finding the hidden things of God in the ocean. And I'll bring you back to Psalm 8 for the later verses after the ones I read earlier. Yet we so narrowly missed being God's. Bright with Eden's dawn light, God put us in charge of his handcrafted world, repeated to us his Genesis charge. Now, Genesis charge has been defined. I'm not going to go into dominion and all these different terms. I'm sure there's theologians in the room who would happily answer questions. But as part of a Rocha, we believe that's the stewardship. It means you care for creation, you come alongside creation and see how we can work together. And I've recently finished a book called Home by Jo Sweeney, who also works within the Rocha family. And in it she quotes this quote from Lauren and Mary Ruth Wilkinson, who I had the privilege of meeting when I was interning in Rocha, Canada. They're profs at Regent's College in British Columbia. And they say this: "We are more careful of the little and large bits of creation, placed directly and indirectly into our care, when we know them well." So we start with this awe and wonder. But then, in order to actually care or steward for the creation of the ocean around us, you have to have this moment of actually, okay, it's time to get to know the ocean. How well do you know your ocean, your creation around you? And for me, I've had the privilege of studying lots of different species in a variety of places. And at the moment, I'm a PhD student attached to Cardiff University in Wales, and study these two species, of storm petrel. And in the pictures before as well, the chicks especially are very cute and fluffy, and they have a character about them. But if you actually watch them where they're not in your hand or in a box, this is the kind of noise. So on the screen, you can barely see them as they're flitting past. They're black, elusive, have a white rump, but you don't see that at night. And they have this really cute squeaky call as they're coming into to their nests at night. But if you watch and wait and have the privileges I did of being able to monitor them in nest boxes, you get this view where you get to watch them, where the adults pair up, when they lay their chick, or when they lay their egg, when the egg hatches, getting that excitement of, oh, what's going to happen in this box today? And a part of my PhD, I've developed a camera so we can look at what they're doing in the nest when we're not actually looking, so you avoid the human impacts, or potential human impacts change. And we get this view of an adult feeding its chick, and lots of other different views as well as go through the ton-load of footage that we have from the cameras. But alongside that, then we get to watch the chicks as they grow, their wings grow bigger, they lose their fluff and actually grow to adult feathers. And then you have that mother hen moment where they actually fledge and leave the nest. But you only get that if you stop and look and are patient and get to know the area, get to know the place. Have time to do that. So I spent a year and a half living on a small islet. It took 15 minutes to walk around. But it was an absolute privilege to live within a bird colony. So you have this awe and wonder moment. You then have the stewardship. Okay, how do you steward? You go first into getting to know the place. But then there's that point where you go and look after it. And for me, I hope that the work I've been doing for the last few years can integrate into conservation impacts and change for the better for the birds on the island, as I've been looking at both their behaviours but also the potential threats that are going on that particular island. But there are lots of different ways to get involved. There's lots of different ideas online, and Bob's already mentioned beach cleans and nurdle hunts and starting to get involved and getting to know your place. So biodiversity starts with this childlike wonder moment, this awe and wonder, and develops into learning to look and admire and getting to know your place. And then it ends with this, now it's time to actually do something. And we're not all scientists, and that's okay, but everyone has something, everyone has a part to play. What will yours be?
Thanks, Hannah. So just to conclude, again, just a big thanks from Rocha for inviting us along, for listening to some of our stories. We're grateful for this opportunity to be with you all and for you taking your time tonight. I think Hannah really hit the nail on the head. You know, we need to know our place. You know, what species do you know? Which place and area do you know? How can you learn more about it? And then let that knowledge drive you to do action that's really going to help. You don't have to be a professional scientist to read about some of these things. And many of the things that you might do are things that anybody could do. So just encourage you, even just pick one species over this winter to learn about, to do that. Also just wanted to, reiterate our commitment to combating climate change, but also to point out, you know, in the midst of all this emphasis on climate change, there are a lot of other issues besides climate change. We are in the midst of a biodiversity crisis. We're in the midst of a food security crisis and a climate crisis. So they're all interlinked. Issues like overfishing, If we were to solve the climate crisis tomorrow, overfishing would be killing off species like that guitarfish. And plastic is a part of this issue. I know sometimes we're weary of hearing about plastic, but it's actually made from hydrocarbons, so it's part of the whole climate issue. It impacts species, it impacts habitats. Reducing your use of plastic, being involved in beach cleanups is something that's helping us to love God and to love our neighbor better. And similarly, what you eat also does matter. So there's some practical things, where it comes from, how it was caught. Those things actually do matter to species, to habitats, to places. So you can make a difference. And so that's our charge to you. And we have the next, thanks. We're going to have a time of questions. And just if you're into some of these things, on Twitter, there's ways to follow us and follow Rocha's work. If you want to learn more about our marine program, there's the website there. If this Christmas you want to, there's many ways to support marine conservation, lots of good groups. If you were interested in supporting ours, we have this Gifts with a Difference program where you can support our marine conservation projects with a gift to someone. And then I do have 2 different grow books over there, just £4 each. If that's a hardship and you really want one, I'm happy to give it to you. But that's just the price that I was charged.
Thank you very much, Bob. We've got Dave Matthews here with us tonight. As you know, this project is sponsored by the Templeton Religion Trust, and it's part of the project called Equipping Church Leadership in Age of Science, and I'm the Science congregation, and we wanted, of course, to have a church leader with us tonight so that we could have both aspects of science and faith. And Dave Matthews was obviously pastor of Tube Station. He's now Croyd Baptist Church, and Croyd Baptist Church is the church we're going to be working with in the summer as well. So Dave is going to lead us into the question and answer session. So Dave.
Cool. Hi. It's lovely to see you without masks on. I now recognise some faces from before. Basically, if you've got particular questions, I love the beginning of that, the awe and wonder moment. I talked about my moment in Uganda. In fact, it was later on that I read C.S. Lewis's autobiography, Surprised by Joy. And when I read that, the way he describes his joy moment, and it's something that we have in common with the rest of the world, because he had these joy moments well before he was a believer in God, but they found a home in his faith in God, and but it began with that awe and wonder moment, and also as I'm saying, the details of it. Anyway, guys, if you've got particular questions that you want to
Yeah, good.
Yep.
You never mentioned...
You take that off.
No, you don't need a microphone.
This is Adrian Langdon speaking now.
You never mentioned the smell when you're looking for storm petrels, because when I was looking for them, we used to just go and smell between the rocks and the bits of slate to find them.
It's a beautiful smell.
It
I miss it so
It's
much.
not a pleasant smell at all.
There is a short poem that's written about the smell of a storm petrel, and I'm sorry I can't remember it offhand. But yes, the smell is amazing. It's a pleasant, musty smell, which doesn't sound great, but honestly, yeah.
We were ringing them on the north coast at Polzeath a few years ago, and the smell is on your hands and your clothes for days, isn't it? But it's not an unpleasant thing.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing.
Come, Jonathan.
Even if sustainably caught, should Christians eat seafood?
It's a very interesting question. I think my answer in the short term would be, if you have the resources and the finances and ability to choose to eat something else, then I think at this point you're better off not eating seafood. If you do eat seafood, groups like the Marine Conservation Society here, there's a website that helps to look at how things were caught, where they were caught, and the species that were caught. There are sustainable fisheries. There are species that are lower on the food chain that are eating plants versus eating animals. So you can actually eat sustainably. And of course there are many places in the world where it's usually the poorest of the poor that are out fishing, and often, especially in this time of COVID, people turn to the sea in ways who even weren't fisher people because of some of the issues with farming. There's some interesting eschatological issues. You know, will we be vegetarian in heaven? So if we are embodying in the new creation, you know, we'll be. It appears that God's original plan was for us to be more vegetarian or vegan. Though interestingly, to confuse everyone, Jesus in his resurrected body cooked fish on the beach. So I think there are ways in which our eating needs to try to embody a new creation theology. Some people don't have the choice about whether to eat fish or not. There's really important micronutrients, especially for poorer communities. And but there are ways to eat that are helpful. And I do believe too, it's I'm not going on too long, but
Robert, this is fascinating. I would never have thought about it.
To root it locally, there are Cornish fishermen whose livelihoods, you know, if you stopped eating seafood, you know, maybe there's a way to transition them to other jobs. But if people here are, your local fishmonger is trying to do and use things sustainably, and it seems to be working out that way, I would suggest supporting them. There's been studies of poverty in the UK. This is going back a few years, but most of the places that were the poorest in the UK were traditional fishing areas. And so those kind of communities. So it's very complicated. It's not a simple answer because we want to love our human neighbor, we need to love our fish neighbors. There are extremely destructive ways of fishing, and there are ways of fishing that, and even some ways of aquaculture which are really bad, and some ways which are really good. So I wish there was, you know, the easy answer would be to say don't eat seafood, but I think it's actually much more complicated.
That's a very complex and comprehensive answer to that. And this is quite topical actually because of the political debate between France and England, you know, over fishing. Yeah.
Which, if I could just interject, climate change comes into the fishing. For example, there's strong evidence that groups of fish, their range is shifting farther north. So I think it's mackerel, that there's a quota between Iceland and the UK, and the Icelandic people are asking for more fish because the populations have moved farther north. And so they think they should get more now than the UK should. So those kinds of issues are increasingly going to be, you know, there's a, I think it's, again, remembering back, the sea bass fishery here in the south, that it's a fish that's a warm water fish, so it didn't used to be here, and now it's more of a recreational fishery. So there's some good things also that can happen with climate change, but it's going to cause these kinds of tensions increasingly.
Yeah, interesting, fascinating.
When you, oh, sorry. Yeah, the question about whether we should eat fish is an interesting one, and of course there's another very destructive thing that goes on, and that's the millions of tons of fish that are taken out of the sea every year and ground up into fish meal for cattle feed. And that's a huge issue, isn't it?
It is.
And a lot of that is things like sand eels that the birds are dependent on. Yeah.
That's right. I'll let you do a sand eel. But yes, and for example, for the farm salmon, a lot of fish that could be eaten at a low, things like anchovies or sardines, things that are lower down the food chain are caught and ground up into that fish meal and fed to salmon. And it takes, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it takes more kilos of fish food, like let's say for example a 5-pound salmon, it takes more than 5 pounds of fish to make a 5-pound salmon. So it's really a net loss of fish protein for more of a luxury kind of market. What about sand eels and bird movements and issues?
Yeah, sand eels populations are crashing, which is then affecting the seabird populations across the UK for sure. If interested, there is a citizen science project called Puffin Watch, and there's branched out to various other ones as well, where you can either send in your photos of puffins with different fish in their mouth, and then that helps the scientists then work out what are the puffins now eating, and what's changing, and that's happening. Yeah, there's various other species as well. But Puffin Watch is the first one.
Interesting. I was travelling down from North Devon and listening to Radio 4, and they brought up sand eels and puffin, the decline in puffin population because of sand eels.
On the Southwest News this evening, they were talking about this most dangerous oyster that they're finding.
Pacific oyster,
yeah. Have you not heard of that one?
Yeah, I don't know that specific case, but if you were to characterize the main threats or some of the big threats in the ocean, here we've talked about fisheries, we talked about pollution, we've talked, about climate change. Invasive species is another one of those. In areas of the Mediterranean, for example, 1 out of every 17 species are non-native. So sometimes these species come in and they don't do any harm, they don't necessarily do any good, they're just there and it's okay. But sometimes they outcompete the native species, so maybe there's not a predator. The one example I am very familiar with is maybe you've seen these beautiful lionfish. They're in aquaria and they have these beautiful spines and they're great to look at. Well, people in America liked them too for their aquarium, but then what happens when you move and you need to get rid of it? So, we'll just throw it in the ocean, it doesn't matter. And so in the early 90s, some lionfish were released into the water off Miami, and we've charted how they've spread, and there's no predators for them. They're native to the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and they're basically gobbling up all the fish on the reefs. And so the other bigger fish in the Caribbean, besides being overfished, are also losing a lot of their prey. So they can have very drastic and dramatic consequences. And so I don't know the specific case, but what can happen is that it causes the native species to decline. It changes, and a thing like an oyster is something that creates space for other animals. And so if this species doesn't do the same sort of things that the native ones did, then all the things that rely on those native oysters will die too. So it's.
I think they're in our estuaries. I'm not sure if it was one in Devon or like the River Fal down here, and they were picking it up, and it's quite a big thing.
Wow.
And how do we deal with them? So somebody was getting them, crushing them all up, and feeding them in this garden too.
Somewhat cynically, this lionfish that I mentioned, the solution is actually to try to get people to like to eat it, because then we'll certainly overfish it. That's what we do.
Hannah, on your research in the storm petrel, you've told us how smelly it is and wonderfully smelly it is. On your project, what are you were out in the Azores for how long do you say? Several months into.
Yeah. So I was there on and off for a year and then COVID. But so yeah, about a year and a half of field work.
What are the key biological moments you've had apart from the swimming? And what not you, the story. And what about what specific memories do you have of that particular? Just key points.
I think biologically it was an absolute privilege. We'd be going to the nests every day, and it was always exciting. You never knew what would be happening, which egg is going to hatch today, which chick will have fledged. But also hard to see the circle of life of where an egg didn't make it, or was eaten, or the chick didn't make it, and so being able to document that, and I'm currently comparing it to data that I have from 20 years ago. So looking at the changes or not changes of the biological breeding season, but also the threats and impacts that there are on the chicks. In terms of memories, the picture I showed, this picture is taken by Ben Porter, who's one of my assistants, a friend of mine. He came out to help me, and this is me in the front and Jodie's behind, and just the stars were absolutely incredible. Milky Way we saw when it wasn't cloudy, and it did rain, but it was cold. There were hard times as well, but the beauty of just being able to sit on a cliff, listen to the birds, the squeaky calls, the weird cories, so many different calls of the seabirds, and to see the seasons change as well. I was pretty much on the island for a whole year, where by the time it got to the winter, there's no running water on the island. We had to bring all the food and water on, so there were times where we were literally marooned, and yeah, the boat couldn't come for several weeks at a time.
There were shearwaters as well.
Yeah, so
they were listed there as well.
Yeah. So on the islet, there are 9 species of seabird that breed there across the year. So there's 2 species of storm petrel, the Montero storm petrel and the Bandrup storm petrel, and then 2 species of shearwaters, the Corey shearwater and the I like to call them the little shearwater, but they're technically the Borrelli shearwater. For those who are important in the technical details of scientific names. That's 4. And then we have 3 tern species, the common tern, the roseate tern, and then there's a couple of species of sooty tern. And then there's also a few bulbous petrels as well, which are beautiful.
There's quite a thing going on between you there.
The interesting...
That's what I came for.
So for those who don't know, the islands I've been living on is within the Azores archipelago. It's on the mid-Atlantic ridge off Portugal, as it's between Portugal and the US in the Atlantic. And this particular islet has gone through a lot of changes. So they used to graze goats on there. I think cattle were on there at some point, owned by a lot of different people. But back in 2008, it was officially designated as a natural park, a nature reserve. And earlier on, in '96, the rabbits were eradicated. And so you have photos of this progression from it literally was just a dirt island with a house to now there's shrubs, there's native flora, there's the native flora. So it's a beautiful story to see it, even in this just over 20-year period of change.
I know this focus is more on kind of marine biology, but I'm just thinking kind of closer to home in our gardens and things like that, and especially because I've got young children and you want to encourage them to get to know what's around them. What are the things we can be doing with our garden and our space to protect biodiversity?
I think that's...
No. Robert!
Hannah, why don't you, Hannah?
I mean, gardens are king.
Yeah.
Garden, it all started garden. And it's going to end a garden city. New Jerusalem comes down to earth. So, gardens are important. It's a really important question. We're waiting for the answer.
Step in and help.
So, my uncle will take the mic.
You can't do that.
I think the first and foremost thing that you can do with any garden to promote biodiversity is to introduce water. So however big or small your garden is, just a bowl of water, with a few plants and things around it will attract those creatures that love and need water. One of the things that has been transformational, I think, just in the very recent years, is the abolition of the green sward lawn. And so, one of the things about biodiversity is you try to avoid monocultures, great big fields of this sort of thing, and in the garden that is represented most commonly by the manicured green lawn. So even if you keep some of it as a play area for your kids to kick the football around and that sort of thing, but in other parts, let it go, let it grow wild. Put some wildflowers, sort of plants and that sort of thing in. That's just a couple of the things that I would say. And my wife would say, don't get rid of the stinging nettles. Because there's butterflies and things that...
Small shell peacocks.
Yeah. So have a little patch of stinging nettles and then your kids will learn that these plants hurt when you touch them.
To add to that, I think water and pond is great of some sort. For bees, then there's bee plant, there's good plants for bees which look great and sometimes smell great. To add to that, and this year my parents and I we didn't mow quite a lot of our lawn, much to the dismay of some of our other relatives, but it was absolutely amazing. We had primroses, lots of different grasses, and we've had so many more bees and bees and bugs in the garden, which was a great thing.
I think too, theologically, there's so much opportunity to tell Bible stories in the garden. Jesus used the environment around the trees. I mean, frankly, if you start trying to look for stuff in the ocean in the Bible, there is some, but you talk about gardens in the Bible and agriculture. And so the same sort of principles of looking on the seashore, getting out a magnifying glass. And I think one of the things Rocha has done, and many other groups have done, is developed resources for education that combines sort of a religious or Christian experience in a garden. So I would encourage you to go to our website, rocha.org, and there are other Christian groups, particularly I think here in the UK, who have looked at gardening from a spiritual perspective. So do a little reading, but the garden is a fantastic place.
Interesting. When I, during this lockdown, of course, we couldn't meet at the church, and so I did Zoom things. And the favourite series that the guys want to hear again is the series I did in the garden, and did looking at various things over a period of 6 weeks, looking at from my garden, showing them different things, reflecting on them. Oh.
Are there any other questions?
I was just going to ask about the storm petrels, and because you did a map of how far they'd flown when they were going on their fishing trips. Can you just talk about that a second?
Yeah, so as part of my PhD, we also tracked the storm petrels using GPS tags. So they were less, about a gram in weight, and storm petrels, western petrels, weigh about 40 to 50 grams, 60 grams. So they sit on the tail feathers, and so we deploy them and they go out to sea. And so we start to get this picture of not only what's happening in the nest, but then what behaviours there are at sea. And during the incubation period, so when the adults are sitting on their nests and they're sitting on the eggs, They went about 1,000 kilometres. So that was the first one we went that almost got to the Irish Sea, up and back. But during the chickering period, there were the shorter trips, so that they could get back to feed their chick. But yeah, really interesting. And there's a lot more very recently, because the tags are now getting smaller. They can go on smaller birds, so they're going. Some really interesting research going on there.
Right.
Thanks very much, Dave. That's great. Just to finish off, I think you'll agree we've been privileged, and to see Hannah and Bob. And what they didn't really say, and what Bob didn't say, really, is that he's been encouraging and getting young people involved in marine science, motivated and informed by their passion for science and their faith. And he's got teams of young people, and he's encouraging them. So we've had a brief glimpse of just one of the team tonight, and the video. But it's work that's ongoing, and it's such a privilege to see someone at the beginning of their career, and someone partway through, working together. And isn't it great, the type of work they're doing? And I'd like to thank them for sharing their experiences with us tonight, and we share our appreciation for it.